Alright guys, this is your 9B video. If you watch these in the proper order, this should be your last video of the unit. If you have not watched them in the proper order, please stop and come back to it later. This video should be last. Alright, so the rise of feudal society with your 9B notes. Okay, reasons feudalism is going to develop. The death of Charlemagne in 814, after being named Holy Roman Emperor, is going to lead to a weakening of the Holy Roman Empire. His heirs are not strong rulers like he is. So the kings and the emperors that come after Charlemagne are not very strong. This weakness is going to lead to multiple invasions by a couple of these invading groups that we talked about in our invaders unit, specifically the Vikings and the Magyars, and also the Muslims. Okay? These outside invasions are going to lead people to turn to local leaders for protection because the Holy Roman Emperors are too weak to defend their regions. So kings throughout Western Europe can't defend large territories from these attacks, these people randomly raiding in the night. So what is going to happen is people are going to stop looking to the king for help and start looking to their local lord, their baron, their count, wherever it is. And that person is going to become important. So instead of having a big national system, we have a very localized structure. And that's going to lead to the development of feudalism. All right, structure of feudal society. At the top, you've got a king. Okay, the king is going to give his land to local lords in return for loyalty and military service. As we said before, the king may be the king, they might be ruling things, but they don't have a whole lot of power right now. They don't have the ability to grow a large army. So what they do is they leave these vassals, these local lords. They're called different things in different parts, counts, barons, all right? They're all called different things. But they leave these vassals, these local lords, in charge of chunks of lands. You might have the Baron of Bristow, the Baron of Gainesville, the Baron of Manassas, all right? So that one person is responsible for that whole chunk of land. They get to take all the profit off of it. They're responsible for all the food that gets grown and all the people. So they're subsidiary to the king, and they were granted this title in agreement to being loyal to the king, but it becomes their land. So they're going to go a step even further, and they're going to divide their land among knights in return for military service. So I'm going to have a bunch of knights working for me as the Baron of Bristow, and in return for their service, I'm going to grant them the profits from this chunk of land and this chunk of land. So this knight over here might have this 10-acre farm, and Sir Dan Nemero might have this 10-acre farm. Sir Sammy Serrano might have that 10-acre farm. If I ever need them for military service, they are coming to me. But the land is the exchange for that. So the knights are going to serve the vassals. Squires is a vocab term you need to know. It's knights in training. They have to apprentice for a long time before they can be knighted. And then finally, the fuel that makes the feudal system work, because the king does not work the land, the vassals don't work the land, the knights spend all of their time training and doing knight things, are the serfs. All right, the serfs work the land in exchange for housing and military, or housing and protection. And this is where it's important to remember. The serfs essentially serve as slaves. They work the land. They do all of the work and they barely get enough food to get by. But they are willing to make that trade because their fear of the invaders, the Vikings, the Magyars, the Muslims that are attacking the countryside, and the only way that they can be protected is knowing that those knights, knowing that Mr. Nolan, the Baron of Bristow, can call on Sir Sammy Serrano and Sir Dan Nemero to protect them if we're ever invaded. They're willing to trade a lifetime of servitude because that's better than getting brutally killed by Vikings and Magyars. So we have this feudal system where we have people granting landed rights down and military protection, and then ultimately the peasants, the vast majority of the population, so like Mr. Grimsland, for example, would clearly have been a serf. All right, they are working the land. They are essentially performing from sun up to sundown slave-type labor for the sole minimal return that they are protected from outside attackers. That's why we have you watch the invaders video first. The other thing that's going to start to develop here is the manor system. So the economy at this time is not a global economy. We're not trading, okay? it's going to revolve around the lord's estate or the manor. So again, if I'm the Baron of Bristow, I might have a manor, or some of you guys might think of it better as a castle. All right, these manors are self-sufficient. You have to think about the geography of Western Europe. I've talked before that the geography of Western Europe is very similar to the geography here in Northern Virginia. Okay, we've got access to a lot of lumber, agriculture, livestock. It's all very good for that in France, in Germany, in southern Britain at this time. So our manors are going to become very self-sufficient. So it's not really safe at this time to travel on open roads, so we don't have a whole lot of trade. Well, that's okay because we have everything we need on the manor. Feudal society functions perfectly fine without any trade. Okay, I've said before that we call this time period the Dark Ages. Part of it's because we forget knowledge, but part of it's also because we stop interacting with other people. We become very, very focused on a tiny little area. Few people will ever leave the manor. Your vassals will sometimes have to leave to go see the king. Knights will have to leave to go fight. But serfs, for the most part, don't ever leave the manor. Okay, if you're born a serf and you're serving me, the Baron of Bristow here, you're probably not going even as far as Gainesville. Okay, keep that in mind. Imagine going your entire life and never going more than 2 miles from the manor. That is essentially what life becomes like in feudal Europe. All right, and as you can see on the picture there, you have different types of planting. You have an essential layout. You can see all that stuff. You can pause it and look closely. All right, and here's another example of what a manor system would look like. And you can pause the video again here and read each of those individually. All right, so we've talked now about how the manor system was completely self-sufficient and there was no need for trade. Well, eventually over time, we're going to start to have the growth of trade again. It takes a little while, but it's going to happen. Local lords are going to come up with this idea that when they create their towns under the authority of their lords, they can tax trade. So as the Baron of Bristow, it might be good for my knights or my serfs to be able to trade goods with people from Gainesville or people from Manassas because I can collect a tax on that. So I can make nothing. I can make zero effort and make money off of that. Outstanding. That's great. So the Baron of Bristow, I love this trade idea again. We haven't had to do it before, but why not? Okay. So we start to have trade get to fuel up as we move later into the Middle Ages. The other thing that will develop during this time period are known as guilds. Guilds are organizations of individuals in the same business. Okay, they're going to become an important political force in town. So what guilds essentially will do in these towns is it'll be like all of the blacksmiths. For those of you who don't know what a blacksmith is, they work with metal, shape metal. So all the blacksmiths might form a guild. And what they'll do with that guild is they will kind of establish what prices would be for everyone so that none of them are getting shorted, none of them are overcharging. So they're almost like a labor union. Guilds are essentially what becomes labor unions. They're there to protect these people's rights so they don't get abused too much, as well as to enforce a common good. So you have the development of guilds as we have the development of towns. Now again, all of this is going to come later as we start to move away from feudalism. And there's a couple of practice questions for you. The big thing to remember with feudal society is it's caused by the invasions from the Vikings and the Magyars, and it's a brutal society, a brutal setup, especially if, like Mr. Grimslin, you were a serf and you spend all of your day doing nothing. But again, it's better than being dragged off to slavery by the Magyars or brutally killed by the Vikings. All right? And the Catholic Church is going to grow in power during this time period too. Again, because remember, in every town there's a church. And a serf may have a otherwise awful day, but they can go seek salvation by praying or doing penance or reading from the Bible. So the Catholic Church is going to grow in power as well during this time period. These are the things that you need to remember about Middle Ages Europe. We'll come back to Europe here later on when we start talking about coming out of the Middle Ages. And that's all.